In 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt created the nation's first national monument designation. The purpose of this designation was to preserve for all Americans significant pieces of the country's history. Ecology, geology, and beauty. All national monuments are designated by U.S. presidents and are chosen as their personal memorials of those most special parts of this great country. Memorials that they saw a need to protect over all others. Some are big. Some are small. Some garner large budgets and staff. Others next to none. All were chosen by presidents who considered them the most important places to protect over all other places in the country. America's national monuments tell the story of the nation's past and present glory. In Legacy of the Great Plains, we will visit the 10 monuments associated with America's once vast grasslands.
The Southern Plains are distinguished by short grass prairies, hot, dry summers, and cold, windy winters. But in spite of these tough climatic conditions, the human history is rich. Indeed, the Southern Plains are called the cradle of North American culture. I'm Bo Svensson, and I'll be your guide to the national monuments of the Southern Plains. Nowhere else in the United States is the long history of Native American life better represented than at the Alibates Flint Quarries. The oldest documented people on the continent used the flint quarried at this monument. However, the monument is one of the stepchildren of the park system, even though at the time of its creation there was a Texan in the White House, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and the leaders of both the Senate and House were also Texans.
The Alibates Flint Quarries is the only national monument on the Great Plains not accessible to the general public. A ranger must guide visitors up a winding trail, a trail that leads to the Dolomite Bluffs, overlooking the Canadian River flowing through the Texas Panhandle. Tucked between the white dolomite is a 3 to 5 foot layer of the most colorful flint in the world, Alibates Flint. Flint that for over 12,000 years has been the raw material for a procession of native cultures fashioning arrowheads, spear points, and a wide variety of tools. Across this 1 square mile area, contained within the monument are over 500 quarries dug by the Indians to obtain the precious flint.
These pits used to be about 3 to 5 feet deep. What they made in here is what we call a trade blank or a preform. They would work this flint down in a kind of an oval shape, and it'd have a wavy, sharp edge all the way around it to make sure it didn't have any fractures, impurities, quartz crystals in it. They're going to have to carry this out of here on their back. They want to make sure it's a good solid piece of flint. And then they'd work this into the finished product where they were camped. They were camped all up and down the Canadian River. And so they just take the raw product, work it down to where they're pretty sure it's a good solid piece of flint. And this is what they would take and make the arrowheads or scrapers or spear points or knives or axes or whatever tool they happen to be needing at the time.
A mile to the south are the 700-year-old ruins of the prehistoric Native American culture that once turned the products from the Alabates flint quarries into a major economic enterprise that spanned the continent. Yet sadly, all that remains today are a few foundation stones of their single-story buildings. On the ledges near the ruins are a series of petroglyphs carved into the dolomite: frogs, buffalo, and unexplained peckings of giant feet. Contained within the monument is a remarkable transitional environment, a rare combination of short grass prairie, scrub desert, and mesquite chaparral, all in unique combinations throughout the monument. Lacking a visitor center, the vast collection of artifacts excavated from the ruins is on display at the Panhandle Plains Museum in Amarillo, Texas. Designated by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965, Alabates Flint Quarries National Monument is truly a transitional zone of the Great Plains and a memorial to over 12,000 years of Native American presence on the North American continent. Alabates Flint Quarries National Monument is contained within the larger plateau of the Texas Panhandle known as the Staked Plains, or by its Spanish name, Llano Estacado. This plateau is where the high plains of the north transitions into the rolling plains of the south. Here, there's a gradual 1,500-foot drop in elevation from north to south. But to the east, the drop-off is a series of dramatic and spectacular breaks, colorful cliffs, palisades, valleys, and haunting canyons. Some have called it the Grand Canyon of the Great Plains. Within these canyons are 250-million-year-old Permian red beds and dolomites. It is in the dolomite that the Alabates flints are found. The Alabates flints belong to the largest group of minerals found on the Earth, the silicates or silicon dioxide. Making up 90% of the Earth's crust, the silicates include quartz crystals, agates, and petrified wood. Geologists believe that the flints at the Alabates National Monument were produced by the same process that produces petrified wood. Dissolved silicon dioxide molecules replace the molecules of buried wood, one molecule at a time. However, in the case of the Alabates flints, the silicon dioxide replaced buried ancient sea mud, molecule by molecule.
Alabates flint has every color you can imagine in it. The only color we don't find much of is green, but every other color you'll find in this flint. That's why this area is unique for that one purpose. There's a lot of flint found all over the United States. It's just not as pretty as Alabate. Doesn't have as many patterns and colors in it. And that's what makes it a unique place, is all the colors and patterns that are in this flint.
It was the presence of trace minerals at the time of the sea mud's petrification that created the spectacular colors and patterns so cherished by America's native people. For over 12,000 years, the sound of hammerstones striking flint echoed through this part of the Canadian River Valley at Alabates Flint Quarries National Monument. The staked plains containing the monument are where documented evidence of Native American occupation goes back the furthest. Nearby are the original discovery sites of both the 12,000-year-old Clovis culture and the 10,000-year-old Folsom culture.
And we know for sure from the archaeological excavations that some of the very first people that occupied this country used Alabates flints for tools and weapons. The Clovis people used it. The type site at Clovis, New Mexico on the Blackwater Draw. Many of their tools and weapons they found in that site were made out of Alabates flint. And they dated that site at 11,500 years old. And we don't know where they actually dug the flint out like some of the later Indians, or where they just broke it off of the outcrops, but we do know they used the flint as far back as 12,000 years ago.
These Paleo-Indians hunted the great mastodons and mammoths with spear points, some chipped from the Alabates flint. But it was a group of Indians known as the Antelope Creek people, occupying the monument's area between 1000 and 1500 AD, who would develop the flint quarries into a way of life. Living between the Puebloan cultures, including the Anasazi, to the southwest, and the mound builders of the Mississippian culture to the east, the Antelope Creek Indians turned the flint quarries into a crossroads by manufacturing and trading flint products to both great native empires. Indeed, the Antelope Creek people became the first arms merchants on the North American continent. Like the Pueblo and mound-building empires, the Antelope Creek Nation disappeared shortly after the arrival of Europeans in 1492. Today, the Wichita and Pawnee tribes claim the people of this remarkable culture as their ancestors. 250 years after Columbus, the nomadic Comanche and Kiowa moved into the area. Indeed, it became the Comanche's great stronghold and the last area on the plains to succumb to white intrusion. It was here that the Kiowa handed Kit Carson his only defeat in the Indian Wars at Adobe Walls. And it was here that the famous Comanche chief Quanah Parker initiated the Red River War, the final great battle for the Southern Plains. It is here that the buffalo hunters brought the Great Plains' most majestic creature to near extinction. And it was here in 1874, at Palo Duro Canyon, that the last fight for the Southern Plains took place, when Colonel Ranald Mackenzie trapped the last renegade Comanche and Kiowa warriors and killed over 1,000 of their horses. For 12,000 years, the Alabates Flint have expressed the spirit of the Native American people in the beautiful tools the tribes have shaped. The Alabates Flint has been a symbol of the Native American people of the United States.
Though Teddy Roosevelt is credited with establishing the national park system, including the national monument designation, it was actually President Woodrow Wilson who created the National Park Service in 1916 to administer the already existing 40 parks and monuments. Although he never visited the site, in that same year, Wilson set aside an extinct volcano as a national monument. It was Capulin Volcano. For years, the monument was inaccessible to the public and was managed by ranchers who used the land to graze their cattle. Finally, here in 1925, a road was made that took the public to the rim of this magnificent volcano, providing an experience like none other in the country.
For the travelers plodding along the Cimarron Cutoff on the Santa Fe Trail, the first mountains they would see, the first indications that they were about to leave the Great Plains, were not the Rocky Mountains, but the jagged peaks and flat-top mesas of the 8,000 square mile Raton-Clayton volcanic field. At the center of this huge and geologically recent tectonic field is Capulin Volcano National Monument and its majestic, nearly perfect cinder cone, Capulin Volcano. Inexplicably, Capulin Volcano is tree-covered as it rises up to over 8,000 feet above sea level. At the base of the volcano is what geologists call a squeeze-up, a pimple of magma that popped up through the Earth's crust. Nearby are cinders that once exploded thousands of feet into the air when the volcano erupted. Propelled by fiery gases, these volcanic remnants were once part of the most powerful kind of geological event the Earth has to offer. A mile-long road leads to Capulin's rim. From there, a hiking trail leads down into the center of the now extinct volcano. Another trail circles the rim. Along the rim's windward side, the pinyon pines are sculpted into bizarre and exotic shapes, rivaling those of any Japanese garden. Suddenly, The whole volcanic field lies below you in every direction. Not only is the Raton-Clayton volcanic field the nation's easternmost field, but also it is the only one located in the Great Plains. Visible in every direction are the ripples of those ancient lava flows. To the east is Baby Capulin, a younger and smaller, near-perfect volcanic cinder cone. Like Capulin's mixed forest prairie microenvironment, the Raton-Clayton volcanic field contains numerous islands of transitional and relic ecosystems, reflecting the cooler and wetter times when the field was forming from 9 million to 50,000 years ago. Capulin Volcano National Monument was established in 1916 by President Woodrow Wilson and is indeed one of the wonders of the Great Plains. Volcanoes such as Capulin are one of the Earth's most impressive landforms. What makes Capulin Volcano so unique?
Capulin has a couple unique things. One is that it had 4 eruptions. They all came out of the base of the volcano. So the cone itself was preserved really well, and it's also really large for a cinder cone.
How does a cinder cone such as Capulin form? Astonishingly, the process takes only a few days. Hot molten magma rises swiftly through a pipe, a crack in the Earth's crust. At the surface, a vent forms and magma oozes out. At the same time, rising hot gases violently spew ash and hot lava fragments into the air. Falling back to the ground, these volcanic cinders and ash build up around the vent, growing higher and higher. During the course of the multi-day eruption, this phenomena constantly repeats itself, so that over time, an avalanche of cinders and ash roll down the slopes of the ever-growing mound, eventually producing the characteristic conical shape of a volcanic cinder cone. Concurrent with these explosions, red-hot rivers of lava flow from the vent. In the case of Capulin, flowing westerly towards the Rocky Mountains. Then, as the volcano's energy diminishes, cooling lava coats and cements the inside walls of the cinder cone and eventually seals the vent itself, ending the brief but spectacular life of the volcano. Today, Capulin Volcano is quiet. It is estimated that its eruption occurred around 60,000 years ago. Tucked in the extreme northeastern corner of New Mexico, Capulin Volcano is just part of a greater geological story.
Capulin's in a volcanic field. It's called the Raton-Clayton volcanic field, and it goes from the foothills of the Rockies about 90 miles out into the plains. It's the size of Massachusetts. It's had about 100 different volcanic eruptions over about a 9 million year period. And people ask if it's active. Geologists don't consider it active because the last eruption in this volcanic field was about 35,000 years ago. And if it's been more than 10,000, they don't consider it active. However, that doesn't mean there won't be another volcano, because in the history of the volcanic field, over the 9 million years, there's been times when there's been no activity for as long as 500,000 years.
3 distinctive types of volcanoes can be seen from the top of Capulin.
Yeah, we have different kinds of volcanoes. Like Capulin Volcano is a cinder cone. To the southeast of us, we have Sierra Grande, which is a shield volcano. And then, I don't know if we can see it behind me, there's a fair amount of mesas. And the mesas, the theory on their development is the lava came out and filled valleys, and then the valleys throughout the 9 million years or whatever have eroded away, and then you have these mesas that are sticking up today.
An aura of mystery surrounds the Raton-Clayton field that contains Capulin Volcano. What forces caused the 9 million years of intermittent volcanic eruptions that mark the history of the field? Chemical analysis of the basaltic rocks forming the entire field indicates the volcanoes all came from a single magma source. But unlike most volcanic fields, Raton Clayton is not associated with any tectonic movement of the continental plates. One explanation suggests that a giant magma plume is slowly migrating underneath the surface, a hot spot. A hot spot perhaps ready to erupt unexpectedly one day soon.
Capulin's human history, recorded, starts with the Spanish, and it's thought Coronado came right by Capulin volcano. That would have been in about 1540. And then the Spaniards arrived, mostly coming over from Taos in the 1600s. When the Spanish came here, the native folks they found were Comanches and Jicarilla Apaches. And none of those folks live in this area anymore, but the Jicarilla Apaches have a pretty strong cultural connection and maybe religious connection to Capulin volcano in this area, and probably visit us a couple times a year. The Spanish were mostly sheep people, and then kind of the next wave of folks was mostly Anglo cattlemen.
But the most interesting story associated with Capulin Volcano National Monument involves the earliest humans to set eyes on the volcano, a woman rancher and a black cowboy. 14 days after President Wilson designated Capulin Volcano a national monument, the fledgling National Park Service appointed Jessie Foote Jack the monument's custodian and the Park Service's first female superintendent. Jack, who owned a ranch a few miles northwest of the volcano, received only a nominal fee for protecting and developing the Park Service's newest addition. The foreman of her ranch was an ex-slave, a black cowboy named George Majunkin. Majunkin also helped with the management of the monument, thus becoming the Park Service's first black employee. But Majunkin also had a keen interest in science and natural history. 8 years before the establishment of the monument, Majunkin had found the bones of an extinct species of buffalo in the weathered rock and soil along an arroyo a few miles from the volcano. Eventually, a spear point was found embedded in one of the buffalo bones. In 1927, radiocarbon dating showed the site to be over 10,000 years old. Up until that time, it had been thought that humans had only occupied the North American continent for a few thousand years. The point, with its characteristic fluted shape, called the Folsom Point, opened up a completely new era in the study of North American archaeology. George Majunkin, the ex-Texas slave, had made one of the most important scientific finds of the 20th century. At sunset, atop Capulin Volcano, as light and shadow play with the frozen volcanic features below, one is drawn to wonder, who were these early inhabitants of North America? What did they see and feel as they looked upon this mysterious volcanic field or hunted in the shadow of Capulin Volcano?
During the Indian Wars on the Great Plains, the American military built over 100 forts to protect wagon trains carrying immigrants west. By the early part of the 20th century, they had all been abandoned and all but disappeared. In time, a few would be rebuilt or restored, but only one fort remained as a true ruin, Fort Union National Monument. For over half a century, the local residents of Las Vegas, New Mexico, preserved the site until its monument designation in 1954 by President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Fort Union National Monument lies at the junction of the Santa Fe Trail and its Cimarron Cutoff. The monument contains the greatest and largest ruins of the American Republic. Like the castles of Europe and the pyramids of Egypt, the ruins here are cloaked in mystery. What long ago undiscovered events transpired here? Who stood by these buildings 150 years ago? What ghosts of the Old West hide in these corners? As the sun sets low in the west, every angle and shadow of the fortress ruins stirs the soul and imagination.
Fort Union is here to commemorate, to memorialize, to remember maybe a period in history that dated from about 1851 until 1891. Fort Union was established as one outpost along the Santa Fe Trail as a way of protecting travelers on the trail, as well as just providing general protection for what was then the ultimate western frontier.
Like all military posts of the Great Plains, Fort Union was unwalled, an open collection of buildings made of reddish brick and stone, surrounding a prison, storehouses, and bakery. But Fort Union was more than just a military post. It was the central supply depot for all military operations in the Southwest. And during its time, it contained the largest hospital west of the Mississippi River. Fort Union was designated a national monument in 1954 by President Dwight Eisenhower, making it a memorial to that uniquely American epoch known as the Wild, Wild West. In 1821, a group of American merchants led by William Becknell set out from Missouri with a caravan of ox-drawn covered wagons. Their goal was to set up a trade route between the United States and Mexico's northern provinces. On November 16th, they reached present-day Santa Fe, New Mexico. In the process, they inaugurated the Santa Fe Trail and showed that people could safely cross the Great Plains, or what was known at the time as the Great American Desert. 25 years later, Stephen Watts Kearny would lead his mounted dragoons along the Santa Fe Trail on a mission of war. Reaching Santa Fe on August 18th, the Mexican officials there surrendered without one shot being fired. This was part of the Mexican-American War, and as a result of the United States victory, the western edge of the Great Plains, the desert Southwest and California, became part of the United States. Now the American military had a new role.
Now, after 1846, after the Mexican War, it became the responsibility of the American government to provide protection to this part of the country. And they did that by bringing in troops and stationing them in various villages around the Southwest in what's now New Mexico. That became economically unsupportable, very expensive to house these troops in these small villages. So they started looking at the potential of actually opening forts. And that's what led to the establishment of Fort Union in 1851. From about 1851 until to the start of the Civil War, in 1861, the fort actually existed at a location about a mile to the east of us here, over near the ridge, which is...
In 1868, Fort Union's cavalry took part in the Army's winter campaign against the Comanche, ending a 5-year battle for the control of the southern plains. In 1891, the fort was abandoned. Taken from the air, this remarkable 1960s photograph shows the remains of all 3 forts and the vast network of wagon ruts at Fort Union National Monument. When those early Missouri merchants pioneered the Santa Fe Trail, what they found along the way was a shortgrass prairie, a low-growing mixture of the short grasses, little bluestem, side oats grama, needlegrass, mixed in with prickly pear cactus and a variety of forbs. It was a harsh, arid ecosystem. Remarkably, 2 of the most important animals of these plains were not native to North America. They were brought by the Spanish to the New World, yet thrived on the shortgrass prairie. One was the Iberian mustang, which arrived with the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, and the other was the Texas longhorn, originally brought to Spain by Moors from Africa and later transplanted to the New World. Both roamed free after the Spanish abandoned their missions in Texas and were driven from parts of New Mexico. The wild horses became the nucleus of the Plains warrior culture, and the Longhorns, after the Civil War, were rounded up and driven along such famous trails as the Chisholm Trail to northern industrial markets. Today, the goals of Fort Union are to restore the shortgrass prairie to its former glory, once formed the Santa Fe Trail. And in doing so, Fort Union, as only a true ruins can, will be there to carry the
Thanks for watching America's National Monuments, Legacy of the Great Plains, and our trip to Monuments of the Southern Plains. I'm Bo Svensson.